Morning, hello there. I decided to put those parodies of Hughes and Evans on private. I'm a bit ambivalent about them. Yeah, there's been some criticism of it, and I'm ambivalent because I suppose it could be seen by some people as making light of the situation, and it's not a light situation. It's a horrific situation, and obviously for Lucy and the family and for the parents of those babies. But I see both those figures as nightmare figures. They're not humorous. They're not clowns. They're dark nightmare figures. If you're a blameless person and you're leading a normal life like Lucy was, working hard, and then you've got a character like Hughes, that level of stupidity attached to arrogance and power that comes into your home, can decide to look at anything, take anything away, distort anything he wants to. And obviously you've got Evans, another nightmare figure, who's so driven by his fixed ideas about what he's going to look for, because he's being paid by the police. He's going to find the crime. And the police want him to find the criminal and find the crime, and they already know who the criminal is. So they're nightmare figures, they're not humorous. When I was doing those things, whether people think they're stupid or whatever, some people think they are, it wasn't an enjoyable thing to do. I know it's part of looking into the abyss. It's the abyss of what they are. So anyway, I might have to think more about that. And the idea that in different ways people are getting pushed back who are kind of talking about this case, and it's not that I'm worried about that per se. It's just that, is there any potential to give them ammunition to say, this person's a nutter, and it's just the nutters, which they've done already. They was even doing it at the beginning. They were saying it was like right-wing people. It's just absolutely sick, isn't it? Right-wing people are concerned about the verdict and the convictions of Lucy Letby and the fairness of the trial. I don't care about the left-right. It's all a ridiculous false paradigm or false binary that's there to stop us thinking critically anyway. That's all nonsense. But they'll trot out all that rubbish. Anyway, I'm just going to carry on with the talk, not the Talk TV, the Daily Mail interview with Dowie Evans. I'll finish it off. I don't think I'm going to do any more of him because he's absurd. He's an absurd character. If it's not apparent already what a charlatan and a fraud it is, doing the Raj Prasad one, doing the Julia Hartley-Brewer one, or the Sky one, or however many other ones he's done, or newspaper articles, it's just more of the same. He's dead already, if you see what I mean. Figuratively. He's dead. It's been established he's a fool and an idiot. How many more times does it need to be said? But I'll just finish this one off. He should never have been in that court. Should never have been on that investigation. The investigation should have concluded that there was problems of negligence at that. But as soon as the police are involved, they want a criminal. They don't want to find negligence, despite Hughes' ridiculous assertion about bad bugs in the water, which is such a dark, weird joke for him from his perspective. Dark. Well, it's not a joke. It's just a lie. It's a lie. He's a liar. He's a corrupt individual. He's a corrupt individual, as is Evans. Corruption has come into the situation to hide the reality of what's caused those deaths, which is a mixture of the pathogens that are on the ward creating this spike in sepsis, and the fact that it's being understaffed, and all the doctor errors that we've been talking about that are all, we probably don't know the half of them, that would open up the Chester Hospital to innumerable medical negligence claims, and many of them were on the cusp of going forward when the police came in and undercut that, stopped it. So there's this idea, I've heard this number, is it £13,000 of compensation? I don't know whether that's a final figure, but either way, you can see to the families. But I'll just stop this for a minute. Yeah, so that was a phone call. But anyway, back to Evans's interview with Daily Mail. This is from 27 minutes 19.
You know, you're there to do a job. You're a highly qualified doctor doing a job, but how did you feel when you realised what you were dealing with?
Towards the end, I found one of the babies. This is the baby who'd cried and screamed. And I think that's the first time it hit me. This baby has been in severe pain. You know, this baby's in pain. And
he's constantly making inferences that will push back and affirm his theories all the time, and then he's creating his own jigsaw in his mind about what's happened. It doesn't matter what the reality is or what the cause of the baby crying is. It has to go back to his God, bloody hair. It has to go back to his theories, doesn't it? All routes go back to what he started with, which is that, well, I believe that he knows somebody's under suspicion, and he's there to do a job anyway.
I think that's the first case that got to me, because, of course, you're only looking at clinical notes, so you don't know the babies, you don't know anything about them.
I'm only looking at clinical notes, and of course, you don't know the babies. I don't know anything about them. I'm only looking at clinical notes, and of course, I don't know the babies. I don't know anything about them. Do we need anything? Do we need to hear anything else from this person? It's all about these notes and how he's perceiving them, and what he's not looking at, which are all the signs for sepsis and infection. Those 3 lines he just said, I'm just looking at clinical notes, doesn't know the babies, doesn't know anything about them. Exactly, Evans. Thank you. You've just told us in 3 lines exactly where you're coming from and the limit and your limitations.
So you just go through it in a clinical way, really.
That was part of my parody about Hughes saying the word clinical. See, the casual way he just throws that way, so you just go through it in a clinical way, really. The word clinical is a spell word to say it's got importance. It's about his importance, that his words and his view is to be taken seriously, even though he's a basket case. Just ally the word clinical to it. I was thinking of some personal example I could use there, where somebody kept saying the word clinical, and what they were talking about was absolutely rubbish. In terms of that's a personal matter, but related to the NHS, related to the care of a loved one. But they kept on saying this is a clinical opinion. It's clinical. It all turned out to be wrong, incorrect, a mixture of lies and complete mistakes, deliberate mistakes. It's a spell word to make you stop thinking, and these journalists would go, oh, all right, yeah. And anybody listening to the news, oh yeah, it's clinical. And that's why Hughes picks it up and echoes it. It's clinical, yeah. And then he has to think of something smart to say about Lucy Letby in order to make him even seem smarter than he is, which isn't. And so he goes, yes, it was clinical what she did. You can see the way these words are being used as a kind of a wash to create sort of authority, fake authority.
I sent them all off to Cheshire Police, highlighting the ones I thought were concerning.
Highlighting the ones I thought was concerning. Yeah, we've gone over this so much now, it just doesn't bear repetition really, but it's the ones he doesn't, what's all in shadow and what we don't see and what wasn't brought out in the court case, in the trial as far as I know, are his rationale for each case that he doesn't find concerning, and on what basis does he not find the others concerning, despite acknowledging that in some of those cases sepsis will be a cause. And so what's the differential here between those cases and the cases that he does find explainable? So he's got, okay, so what I'm saying is you can have a baby with a sepsis that has a crash, and he can find some of those cases where that's the case. A baby with sepsis and infection and there's a crash in their health, and he can find some of those cases explainable and expected, and some of them just so happens, all attached to Lucy, but just so happens, some of them are unexplainable and unexpected. But what we don't see and what we don't hear is his rationale and his workings out. We need to see his reports for how he makes those, how he can distinguish between those two. But we don't see it. We don't see it.
And telling them that you cross-reference who's on duty for these babies.
Again, it's the idea that, without him, they wouldn't have thought of that possibility. He's got to come up with this idea, well, yeah, I better tell them that that's what they should do, otherwise they'll never work that out. It's all coming from this fool, this utter fool, this charlatan, how to conduct the whole investigation, and then Hughes is there with his bad bug in the water idea, and which isn't real, which is just a made-up piece of crap. And you got this charlatan here saying, well, I'll tell them how, I'll direct them how to work it out, because none of them could work it out, even though the consultants have been working it out for 2 years in their journey of persecuting Lucy Letby. They know what they're going to find. He knows what they're going to find, because it's all talk about agreed facts in a trial. These are agreed facts prior. These are agreed facts in an investigation. The agreed fact is choose the 15 Lucy Letby cases that we've been banging on to the management about. Choose them. Police know them. Evans knows them. They're all coming together in one demonic brew here to seal the deal and create the injustice here, that nothing else stops it until the trial, and then the trial brings the hammer down.
And of course, for the 15, there was one nurse on duty for all of these cases.
And we're talking about 50.
Oh yeah, one nurse on duty. Well, there were other nurses on. See how he puts it. There's one nurse on duty for all the. Well, there are other individually. This is the thing that they manipulate with stats. You see, these are them. There were other nurses on duty on each of those occasions as well. There were doctors on duty for each of those occasions. There were other people coming in and out of those that neonatal ward who weren't named, who will never know who they are. Will never know who they are for each of those cases. It's all built on a series of lies and manipulations, collusions and agreed facts before the event of establishing who's on duty, because they're in a process of designing an accusation that people, the media, unfortunately the jury just go, wow, God, yeah, that sounds like it can't be anyone else then. And after all, you see, if there are no crimes, and I clearly believe there are no crimes being committed, there's negligence being committed. And I think these people are committing moral crimes against Lucy Letby and the families of those children. But that's aside a minute. If there are no crimes of murder, deliberate crimes of murder or attempted murder, then it doesn't matter who's on duty when. It doesn't matter who's on duty when. It doesn't matter if Lucy Letby's on duty for all 32 cases and he finds all 32 cases as problematic. If there's no crimes, it doesn't matter who's on duty when, does it?
Dean, we should probably just say, because the other two are the insulin cases, which make up to the 17 babies involved in the trial.
Yes. So what I then said to the police that you shouldn't rely on my opinion alone. You need to get someone else.
Yeah, don't rely on my opinion alone. I think that's not. I don't think that's just him saying that. I think it's all part of what Hughes says. It's all about creating something that the defence can't attack later. He's pretending it's all coming from him, like, oh, the idea about the rotors is all coming from him. He's describing acts of collusion and joint enterprise between the consultants, the police, hummingbird nonsense, and him. Is the idea, well, God, the defence won't will knock it out of the park if we don't have somebody else to sort of back us up,
So they sent my reports to a consultant neonatologist in Newcastle upon Tyne, Dr. Martin Ward-Platt. His view was exactly the same as mine.
Oh, that's interesting. It's a bit of anecdote, that is. Do we know that? Do we know that? And even if it's the case, who cares? Who cares if it's his view is the same as yours? We'll never know, will we? Because he goes on to say in a minute that he died, sadly died. But what's crucial with this, I'll play this a bit longer because there's a point I want to make about this, the next stage of kind of ratifying his choices and second opinions, as it were.
But sadly he became seriously ill and died. And this is why he was not part of the prosecution team. So that led to the police finding Dr. Sandy Bohin, who would be a neonatologist in Leicester before moving to Guernsey. Her role was to scrutinise my reports, peer review my reports. So she came to the same conclusion as I did.
Sounds like she wasn't, I don't know, but as far as I know, this is her first case. In her interview, Dr. Bowen says that she's not done anything like this before. So was she on the list that the National Crime Agency had that apparently this clown Evans was on? Or did they go looking for her somehow? They found somebody in Guernsey, they've gone quite far afield. But the point I want to make about this, whether it's to the doctor that died afterwards or to Dr. Bowen here, it's the idea that Evans is saying here that she scrutinised his reports and then came to exactly the same conclusions. Is that what you said? Let me go back on that.
Sandy Bohin, who would be a neonatologist in Leicester before moving to Guernsey. Her role was to scrutinise my reports, peer review my reports. So she came to the same conclusion as I did.
That's great, isn't it? That's great. She doesn't scrutinise the medical notes or the 32 cases, which is what should have happened. If you're going to do it, if you're going to have a peer review, you don't scrutinise his reports. You scrutinise those 32 cases from scratch in order to work out what her opinion is going to be. But if they just send her what he thinks and she goes, oh yeah, that sounds likely. What kind of rigour is that? That's absolutely ridiculous. And again, corrupt. A corrupt way of asserting that you've got any kind of peer review there. It shouldn't be about peer reviewing his reports. It should be about a second person and possibly a third person going back to scratch, at least for those 32 cases that he was sent. But really it should be way more cases because there would have been way more crashes over that period of time as well. The person reviewing it, as it were, in this case Dr. Bowen, and I think that the doctor who died was obviously sent his reports again. So he just looks through them and he's, oh yeah, he's probably done that, or oh, that seems all right, I'll just say yes. Least line of resistance. A proper checking of it is obviously to go back to all the notes again, shabby as they may be, and then see what a second and a third opinion says. Not to look at this fool's notes and just rubber stamp them. The chap up in Newcastle, I mean, it's only his story, but the chap up in Newcastle has just rubber stamped his note, rubber stamped his reports, this charlatan's reports, as has Bowen. Not looked at the original material, obviously. Not looked at that. And what is the original material? It's the full span of all deaths and all crashes across that period in time. And they should include the death in August at the very least, 2016, of the late neonate baby that Evans doesn't look at all. And obviously Bowen doesn't either. It shouldn't be about looking at his reports. It should be about someone. I keep repeating the same thing. It's so painful to listen to him. And it's not even just is listening to him, but it's also knowing how bad this process is. As a lay person, I'm not medical or legally trained in any way, but I can tell this is a terrible, awful process without any rigour whatsoever. It's obvious, isn't it? It's obvious.
Some of these babies were victims of inflicted direct harm, direct trauma. Some...
No proof of that whatsoever. Absolutely zero proof of that. Nobody ever saw it. There's no proof of that. There's many alternative theories for why there's been harm, like the poor baby that had its liver, the liver was damaged. There's lots of evidence to suggest that can happen through CPR. You know, if you've got doctors, junior doctors there making all kinds of mistakes that can't put the catheter in and they're trying it 5, 6, 7, 8 times, even the consultants can't do it. You get a guy from Alderhay coming over, does it first time. You know, you've got to then extrapolate from that the potential for some of these doctors, not with a very tiny baby, really putting a lot of force into the CPR and causing that damage to the baby's liver. And the other thing about the physical harm, what does he call it? Let me go back on that.
Her role was to scrutinise my reports, peer review my reports.
Yeah, your reports.
So she came to the same conclusion as I did.
Yeah.
Some of these babies were victims of inflicted direct harm, direct trauma.
Direct trauma. So we talked about the case of the baby with the bleeding in the back of the throat. We've got 6, 7, 8, 9, possibly 10 intubations happening there. The baby's got haemophilia. Doesn't care. He doesn't care about that. Doesn't care about it as a possibility. It's got to be Lucy Letby with a nasogastric tube that nobody sees her doing, like causing traumatic harm. It's just so bad.
Some were victims of air into the circulation, and some had milk and air injected into their stomach.
Well, we've got all the problems about. It's based on his sponge-like brain, remembering that paper from 1987. A lot's happened since then, and in particular, as Professor Arthur says in the trial, that it's not diagnostic of air embolus, these X-rays, and the fact that they're not reliable for diagnosing air embolus. 25 minutes you've got to do it within 25 minutes of death, actually, and thereafter it becomes you're not able to diagnose air embolus from that. And there's all the other potential causes of air embolus, if there is air in the system, from NEC, neck, and the various forms of infection and other conditions as well. So this is what should have been dealt with at the trial via an expert that the defence called, which they didn't call any.
And of course, several of these babies had sustained multiple assaults, and several of them were the victims of having air into the stomach and air into the bloodstream.
It's just piling on the pain, piling on the fake theory, just by repeating it as though it would make it true, as though it makes it true. But unfortunately, in terms of the trial, it resulted in a finding of guilty because there was nothing on the other side to take him apart in the way he should have done. Yeah, I know Myers wanted him off the stand and didn't want him there giving any evidence, but that's not enough, especially if you've got the agreed facts of the insulin cases, which forces the jury, I've said this before, forces the jury into having to say, oh, well, yeah, there is a serial killer there, but they've just brought the wrong one into court. It's never going to work because you've got all these fake air embolus cases that stacked up against Lucy in court at the same time, so they're never going to believe the argument of the defence saying that the insulin cases it was somebody else that interfered with the TPN bags. They're never going to believe it. You can understand why they wouldn't, because the defence have given. The defence absolutely ruined Lucy from the beginning. It was impossible to win that once you've got that agreed fact about the insulin cases, the way this has been presented. She never have got to court in the first place, obviously. She never have got to any kind of charge, obviously. But it's a catalogue, a sinister catalogue of lie and error and, well, it's not error, a sinister catalogue of a construction to destroy someone, with everyone playing their part, their very sinister part, as they are here.
There's been a lot of questions about why Ben Myers didn't call a medical expert for Lucy Letby. We know from court that they did employ a medical expert to review your reports and to review the cases. So can you tell us why you think he didn't call him, or why? It's intriguing.
Apparently there were two he didn't call. Yeah, it is intriguing, isn't it? See what he says.
Over the past 10 years, I've probably prepared as many reports for the defence in criminal cases as I have for the police, for the prosecution. And the rules in relation to the defence are totally different. The defence is under no obligation to disclose anything. Now, what they are obliged to do is to get an independent opinion if the prosecution says that the defendant has harmed an individual and that the evidence is based on medical expertise. So therefore they need to get their own expert or experts. And this is what they did. But once I saw the reports from the two paediatricians, this is in June, I told the prosecution team and Cheshire Police they are not going to call their expert witnesses.
Well, he says, first of all, they're not obliged to disclose anything, and there he says that he gets to see them, and then he can tell the police and the prosecution they're not going to call them. I mean, I've heard elsewhere and read elsewhere that what happens is that experts from both sides, prior to the actual trial starting, do get together and do discuss each other's reports, etc. There's a rule, there's a legal rule, is that the experts on either side, they should be there to give independent information. They're not there to, they can be called as prosecution witnesses and experts, but they're not there with the purpose of getting someone convicted. They're meant to be independent. They should be giving the same information, whether, this is how it was put in this article I read, they should be giving the same information about their expert opinion. He's not an expert anyway, but whether they're working for the defence or the prosecution, it should be the same testimony that they give, the same evidence. In other words, it should be based on what their expert opinion leads them to believe, not because they happen to be a prosecution or a defence witness. But he's there and he's seen these reports and he said, well, they're not going to call them.
Your opinion, did you feel like those reports were prepared to counter your reports rather than to explain what had happened to the babies.
That is.
What kind of question's that? What does that mean? Well, obviously, if there's a different reason what happened to the babies, they're going to counter them. Why is that an either-or question? Why? That's the most ridiculous. She's saying, "Oh, is the report?" You know, instead of saying what happened to the babies, they're going to counter yours report. Why can't it be both? Why wouldn't it be both? In other words, the babies died, likely the conditions of sepsis and NEC, etc., and all the other, haemophilia in relation to the alleged trauma in the throat. That evidence would be competing his assertions, wouldn't it? And it would be saying what happened to them. Not either or, but this and that. Does that make sense? I mean, I just can't. What is it?
Is correct.
And we know, don't we, that...
And that's correct, and that's where he leaves it. He's happy to leave it there. It doesn't make sense. That whole bit of it, that's a massively important part, doesn't make any sense at all. She's asked him, well, why do you think you didn't call them? You saw them, and why do you think they didn't call them then? Is it because they weren't trying to say what happened to the babies? They were just saying something against what you'd said. Well, if they did have a theory about what happened to the babies, well, and it wasn't to do with intended harm, then it would be against what he said. Naturally, obviously, it would be. It's not either or; it's both. But then he just said, yeah, that's it. Yeah, it was because they were saying something in opposition to what I was saying. That's why they wouldn't call them. That don't make sense. Is that a reason not to call them? Is that a reason not to call them then? Because isn't that the reason why they're there? That they're going to say something that's in opposition in terms of their expert opinion. If they're agreeing with Evans, then why then what's the point in bringing them in on the defence case? The point to have them is to have a contending theory, which is opposite of what he's saying, or in opposition to what he's saying, which will be inherently and necessarily a different way of describing what happened to those babies. The way that interviewer puts it, and he just blithely agrees with it, is like, yeah, they weren't going to tell you what happened to the babies. They were just going to say that they didn't agree with me. It doesn't make any sense. There's such a dark knot there of what we don't know about who those experts were, what they had, why they weren't called, and why he had the foreknowledge to just go in there and then have a look at the reports and go back to the police and prosecution and go, no, they're not going to call them. It doesn't tell us anything about their report. It doesn't tell us anything about those defence expert reports, does it? It doesn't tell us anything. What could we infer from that? Well, what could have been in their reports then? He's saying, he's acknowledging there that they were saying something in contention to what I was saying. Well, what were they saying then? And how compelling was that? And if it was compelling, and if it was using any of the arguments that have come up that people have brought to bear in these last 5 weeks, then why weren't they called? Why weren't they put into court so that the jury could hear them? And the jury's got 2 separate stories to listen to then instead of just one. I know Myers is perhaps using some of the material that we don't know. We don't know what those experts came up with. Either they came up with something so good that meant that Myers didn't call them because of reasons of contamination, shall we say, or they came up with something really good, or they didn't come up with anything at all. In which case, why were they there? That part there is just horrific to me. I mean, it's all horrific. It's all horrific. I can't do much more today because it's...
Their expert sat in the court next door, and that's perfectly legal. Like, you sat there and listened to the evidence as it came out from the medics at the Countess, and he did the same and listened to your evidence as well. So
Oh yes.
they were fully in the picture, and they could have been called, but Mr. Myers, for whatever reason, decided that he wouldn't call his expert.
Before we move on to...
And they're going to move on, yeah. Don't stay in there too long, yeah. Well, for whatever reason, yeah. He heard it all. That's such a weird passage, that. I mean, yeah, he heard it all. He heard all your evidence. And Evans says there, yeah, they didn't say... Evans is effectively saying, yeah, they didn't call those experts because they were saying something in opposition to what I was saying. Isn't that what they're supposed to be there for? To say? To have another story of what happened to those babies? But that journalist put it in this absolutely ludicrous way of... It's either... Oh, for fuck's sake. You know, she put it in the way that it wasn't that they weren't going to tell the jury or the court what happened to those babies. They was only going to disagree with you. Why wouldn't those two things work together? Why wouldn't you be disagreeing with him, and by means of doing that, telling a different story about what happened to those babies, i.e. through infection and sepsis and other reasons? And if that is the case, that they were going to do that, why the fuck weren't they called by Myers? And if they weren't going to do that, why were they there at all? None of that makes sense. None of that makes sense. And then Evan go, oh yeah, that's it. That's it. They were just going to disagree with me. That's why I knew they wouldn't be called. That don't make sense either. His confidence that they wouldn't be called because they were disagreeing with him. That don't make sense either. None of it does. None of this does.
Do what next? I did want to touch on the insulin because we guess, I suppose we infer that the jury, in making their decisions, we don't know this for sure, but our inference from the way the verdict came back was that the two insulin attacks were the ones they decided on first.
Exactly, the smoking gun cases, which is why Myers having the agreed fact with the prosecution that somebody had tampered with the TPN bags. There was an attempted murderer there because those two babies didn't die. There was a murderer there. There was a criminal on the ward. Just wasn't Lucy Letby. That's the ones they come back with first. The smoking gun ones. Of course they do. And that's the one that Myers has set Lucy up for by having that agreed fact. He can say all he wants. Oh, it wasn't Lucy. You can't prove it was Lucy. But they got that lovely little diagram with the crosses all by it. And they've got all these air embolus cases. The jury can't do anything else. You know. They're being pushed towards it. And Myers has helped. Myers has helped the prosecution more than anyone else possibly could. By that agreed fact. And having experts that either were good and he didn't call, or were no good. He's helping the prosecution. It don't make sense. People are still writing that, oh, he did everything he could. Yeah, he was good. He's one of the best. He's one of the best. This is just as a side note. Apparently, he was the defence QC at the time that got the guy off, the top policeman off at Hillsborough for the Hillsborough disaster. He got him off. He managed to defend him pretty well. The top policeman, I can't remember his name now. You'll be able to look it up. But yeah, no, he gave everything that the prosecution needed, didn't he? I mean, unless somebody can explain it to me better how he's so good, I just don't get it. I don't understand it. It's just kind of a willful desire to keep saying he's really good and he did everything he could. Well, obviously he didn't. And the same in the Colin Norris case. If you're going to agree that there's another murderer about there, you're absolute hostage to fortune, that the jury's got nobody else there to look at. There's nobody else there. Nobody else has been even questioned about it. They're only just seeing the one person. Who are they going to go with? Oh, there's another unknown murderer we've got to start with. Well, where are they then? Who's what's their name? Who's suspected them? Oh, they're not there. There's only one person in the dock I'm looking at. I mean, it's just...
Now, you were saying earlier on that you hadn't even considered those ones at this point, because in the end, those insulin records were so vital.
The insulin information was very, very important. I described it as a smoking gun.
Smoking gun, yeah, it's important, but they should have been shot to pieces because those tests are utterly unreliable. There's so much that's wrong with those. They were completely the wrong tests to do to establish synthetic insulin, and had those readings that were on those tests actually been real, those babies wouldn't have survived, and they both survived. It tells you that the test's wrong. The readings are so high that it would have killed an adult. So it tells you that the test's wrong. And this differential between the insulin and C-peptide has been challenged in the past as well, because there are other medical conditions you can have which drives a coach and horses through that as a definite thing to say that it's synthetic insulin. People have done a lot of work on that now, the insulin side of things, as well as the air embolus, and they're the things to challenge at the appeal. But will they do it? Will they do it? Will they do it through experts, not just through Myers just talking? They need to do it with the right people there to demolish, to demolish the prosecution's case at every level, on every level, to demolish Evans.
The first insulin poisoning was the second of twins, baby F. His clinical notes were not part of my initial 32 cases. But thanks...
Why not, though? What drew... I think I did a tweet about this. What drew Breary all that way down that line a year later in 2018 to start looking for them then, if it wasn't a crash? And that's the point. If it was a crash, why didn't he have them in the 32 cases? Why didn't Evans have them? Why didn't Evans have baby F and then baby L, the insulin cases? Because it was a crash then, wasn't it? And if it wasn't a crash, what drew Breary to looking at them later? What drew his eye to... They're looking... Either Breary's looking for a smoking gun a year down the line because these air embolus cases aren't enough on their own, as kind of what Evans says in other interviews, because you couldn't really prove them. It's the smoking gun ones we need down the line. If they were deemed as crashes, sudden deteriorations in the child's health, these two insulin cases, why wasn't Evans given them? As he just said, he wasn't given them, didn't see them. Why not then? And if they weren't crashes, if they were not crashes, then why was Breary looking at those notes, trying to find a smoking gun? What? He's trying to look at every case where Lucy Letby's been the nurse. Every single case, doesn't he? They keep trying to find the criminal in every way they possibly can, even though there's no evidence at all that she's done anything wrong whatsoever. Nothing. It's fucking agony to listen to this shit that he's talking.
So Cheshire Police, who did a pretty good job. And one of the investigators...
Cheshire Police did it, did they? The Cheshire Police that, when you see them in Hummingbird, say, oh, we're not medical people, we know nothing about it. Oh, it doesn't mean anything to us, we don't know what the words mean. So, it was down to them that they got that, is it? No, it isn't. Not down to them. It's down to Breary looking for anything he can find, even where there were no crashes. Because if there was a crash, he should have had those in the 32 cases that he was given, wasn't it? Do you see what I mean? It's just...
Getting officers. He rang up and said, look, can you look at the notes of the second of the twins? In other words, the twin of baby E. And I wasn't expecting to find much of anything. Getting officers. He rang up and said, look, baby F. His clinical notes were not part of my initial 32 cases.
Yeah, not part.
But
Why?
thanks to Cheshire Police, who did a pretty good job.
Yeah, right.
And one of the investigating officers, he rang up and said, look, can you look at the notes of the second of the twins, in other words, the twin of baby E? And
that's really come from the police, isn't it? He's made it out as though it's all come through Operation Hummingbird. Those policemen who know nothing about medical cases, who are looking for a bad bug in the water, and who know nothing about nothing. And he's making out as though that's come from Operation Hummingbird to him, and they've done a great job by finding it, like they know what they're doing. No, it hasn't. It's come through Breary. It's Breary on the hunt for a smoking gun. In a case that obviously wasn't recorded as any kind of crash in any way. Because if it had been, he should have had the notes. It just stinks. All of it stinks. It's hellish.
I wasn't expecting to find much of anything. So I went through the notes and I found this insulin level.
I wasn't expecting to find much of anything. What? What does that even mean? It's just...
of over 4,000.
Yeah, over 4,000, which would kill you. But those babies survived. So what does that tell you about the reliance on that test result? What does it tell you about it? That it's a basket case result. Doesn't make sense. Wouldn't have survived. Both babies survived. They weren't drastically ill. They were released into their parents not that long after. They were having some problems because of the bad medical care on the ward, yeah. But they weren't suffering severe insulin poisoning. It's just a bit of paper that says something, a record so high that it would have killed them. So obviously that's not reliable, and it's not the right. It's not the right. The laboratory tells us this in documentation that it's not the right test to do when you're testing for synthetic. If it says if you've got any suspicions about, insulin being given as a form of poisoning deliberately, then you've got to do a completely different kind of test. Completely different kind of test. And had they been worried about that at the time, they could have done a certain kind of test which would have told them exactly, had it been synthetic insulin, even the make. They didn't even the make, the brand of it. They didn't do any of those tests. They got this test here, which is obviously unreliable, with a level of 4,000, which would kill an adult. But these babies, they weren't massively affected by what they're saying. They had other problems. It wasn't there. It wasn't there at that level. They were producing insulin themselves because of the conditions they had. And both babies were being given certain amounts of insulin. Baby E and F were both on insulin, even though the newspaper reports lied about that fact. They both had certain amounts of insulin. And because they were identical twins, there's the great possibility that baby F was given, baby E sadly dies, and then baby E's insulin is still in the fridge. And it's quite possible, because they got the same name, these babies, that a nurse or a doctor or whomsoever accidentally gave baby F, baby E's insulin. And that might have increased the level as well, by accident. So,
with an associated very low level of C-peptide.
And it's this ratio between insulin and C-peptide that was key in the trial that you'd seen before. So when you saw it in baby F's notes, it rang alarm bells.
It was a eureka moment.
It's not a eureka moment, no, because there are reasons that you can have that disparity of low C-peptide and very high insulin, where it's not to do with being given external insulin. And there have been many papers written on that since. But he just has to go back. He just didn't understand the science. He doesn't care that he doesn't understand it. And there was nobody on the defence side to destroy that. Plus how can you have a test showing this massively high level of insulin that would kill an adult and would have killed those babies? Those babies survived unscathed. Doesn't that show and demonstrate that that test was completely and utterly unreliable in terms of it being a eureka moment or proof or a smoking gun about anything at all? Anything at all.
Frankly, I mean, how on earth could the insulin have got in there?
How could it have got in there? Well, yeah, well, maybe there was a certain amount of insulin given that was baby E's insulin. Baby E had died, but the twin of baby E, baby F, was given that insulin by mistake by someone. Doesn't have to be Lucy Letby, just by someone just added it to the TPN bag. And baby F had been given a certain amount of insulin before anyway, formally, You got to look at the. I'll link Dr. McLachlan's Substacks about the insulin. The second one he did about what happened to baby F makes it all clear. If you just read that through, that's the thing to read. The Substack about that, but I'll link both of his Substacks relating to insulin. But they're the things to read about it.
But for somebody either injecting the baby directly or injecting insulin into the intravenous fluid bag, and therefore the insulin trickling through in that way.
Another giveaway about this complete basket case of a man, this fraud. Well, there's no signs of physical injection into the body about that. In the court, the whole premise of this was just about insulin being put somehow by someone into these bags. And here he's got it. He can have it either way. He's saying, oh, was it injected into the body or the bags? Like, he's so loose with it. The whole court case was discussing it about these bags being tampered with. And now he's saying, oh, it might have been injected. But there's no evidence of that at all. He can have it any way he wants. He can just choose any bit. Oh, it could have been that, as long as it's Lucy then, isn't it? We should have done it somehow. It doesn't matter. Back to his thing, he says in the Talk TV thing. Oh, it was the only thing I could think of, frankly. Frankly, it's the only thing I could think of. How this absolutely criminally sick, fraudulent bastard ever got into that courtroom is just, it's disgusting. He's like Roy bloody Meadow, And he was a supporter of Roy Meadow as well. Roy Meadow that effectively murdered Sally Clark by getting her put in prison on his ridiculous evidence saying that it was 76 million to 1 that her second child had died of cot death. Because he just made it up. He just made all the maths was all over the shop. And when they wanted to ask him, well, where's your working out, Meadow? He goes, well, it's all been shredded. I can't bring it, can't show it to you. It's all been shredded how I worked it out. And it was all complete trash. It was rubbish. And then he was lost his licence from the GMC. And there was a big outcry and he got it back again. And you got people like Jairam and Gibbs supporting him. I think it was Gibbs. I know it was Jairam. I think Gibbs as well. And Evans. Evans takes up the mantle of Professor, I don't call him Professor, this Meadow creature's Munchausen by proxy nonsense. You've got the example of Evans doing that in one of his cases, saying somebody's got Munchausen by proxy, he's never even met them. These people are fucking dangerous. Whether it's Southall, Meadow or Evans, and there's another one, I can't remember his name, they're absolutely dangerous people. Dangerous to justice. They get people. What Professor Meadows did and what the result of for Sally Clark was that she ended up absolutely destroyed, and within 8 months of being exonerated for the verdict being overturned, the conviction being overturned, she was dead because she was destroyed by a villain like Meadow in the same way that this creature Evans is doing to Lucy Letby and has tried to do to other people in the past. These people are criminals. I see them as moral criminals. In terms of natural law, they're absolute fucking criminals. They need to be absolutely expunged. Got rid of. They mustn't ever have a place in any courtroom ever again. And they've got to look into everything they've ever been involved with. And they need to be, their arses sued off them. You won't be having that lovely house in Carmarthen for much longer, I think. You need to have everything bloody sued from you, you absolute bastard, Evans. You can tell I'm angry today. I am just pissed off. I mean, just I can't. I'm not going to listen to any more of him after today. We've done it. You know, he's as I said before. There's no need to keep hitting him. He's dead already. You know what I mean? We've just done it 1,000 times over, and so many people have as well already. You know, it's established that he's an arsehole.
Sadly, all that information was in his notes, but for whatever reason, it was missed by the clinicians at Chester.
That was an awful tragedy, because whatever the cause of the insulin getting into this baby's bloodstream,
Whatever the cause,
it would be what we call a never event. In other words, this should never happen.
Oh, you see, so that's what I mean. So, yeah, it's that the consultants couldn't work it out. Nobody can work it out. Only he can work it out. And then Breary just finds it a year later after those first 15 cases are chosen, just so happened replicating what they were persecuting Lucy Letby for 2 years. And it's just completely unreliable evidence, utterly unreliable. I'm running out of things to say about it.
But if they were alert to it, then, of course, there would have been a review. They would have gone through the notes. They would have found that 2 nurses were responsible for giving the IV fluids, one of whom was Lucy Letby.
You bastard.
Stephen Breary was already concerned after the first 4 cases.
Thank you. Thanks for saying that, Evans, because now we know why you did those first 4 babies. We know, yeah, he knows, and I know he knows that because of the trial, but he knew it before. Stephen fucking Breary and Jairam and Gibbs and B, it's probably mostly Breary. That's the link, I think, that's there. Link it, particularly Breary, Jairam and Gibbs, that they know what they're looking for. He's there to back them up. Not just when he comes in. He knows the problem that's there. He knows what the accusations are before he gets involved with the police. Evans does. Utter corruption, utter collusion. He knows the history of it before he even gets involved with the police. He's just an absolute pathological liar, Evans is.
So we've now got...
Sue me.
In fact, a 6th where she's involved. And I think...
Not involved in anything.
If they had acted on that, I think it would have stopped all the other deaths and collapses.
Now the trial...
Yeah, that's so convenient to say, isn't it? Well, they did review it. And the pathologists reviewed it. Pathologists reviewed those 3 deaths, and they were all found to be of natural causes. And the RCPCH did their report and said that there was no individual person responsible. So they all did that. It's only this scumbag, it's only this loathsome creature that can come along and look at some bunch of shabby notes and create this confection in conjunction, in cahoots with a scumbag like Breary, who's gone looking for some smoking gun and come up with these test results that are completely unbelievable, because had it been at that insulin at that high level, those babies would have survived. And there's other reasons for raised insulin as well on top of it, and they were being given insulin as well, and a sepsis process and NEC would have caused the raised insulin as well. So there's so many things. It should have been destroyed, but instead, what did Myers do? He agreed the fact of it. He said, "Yeah, I agreed the fact." I'm just so sick, and it's just so disgusting. The more you just hear it, you can see what's happened here. You can see it.
Over, you're going back and reviewing more cases.
I'm going to leave that to... I've had enough today. He just absolutely... He's going to have to get his comeuppance, this creature Evans. This vile, greedy, sinister nightmare figure Evans. When things are really, really bad, And there's dark forces coming together like there was in that hospital. All really bad things happening, nobody taking responsibility. It attracts dark energies like this creature, Evans. And stupid and dark energies like Hughes. They're all there waiting in the wings. A dramatis personae of sinister, sinister beings comes into play and coagulates. And I'll leave it there and then see if I can do the rest of it another day. And I think I've had it with Evans then, because for fuck's sake, what more do we need to say? We can see what he is. Any rational person can see what he is and hear what he is. You don't have to be medically trained to get this. Anyway, thank you. Bye-bye. Cheers.